imagine Kerala having a situation like this, which is actually endowed with forests and a lot of water resources. But somewhere they let go of their duck well culture and they started depending on pipe water. One of the significant issues in India is that we are still one of the largest nations which are dependent on groundwater. And the unlikely statistic that many of us will think industry is the biggest consumer of groundwater, but it is actually irrigation that is the biggest consumer of groundwater, and the irrigation sector gets a lot of free water, free power, and so therefore they are big guzzlers of groundwater. And domestic use of groundwater is at 9%. And if you see both in urban and rural, a significant portion of our water security actually comes from groundwater sources. And in particular, please note this statistic, because rest of my talk is kind of going to focus on this, is that 85% of rural water requirements are fulfilled by groundwater, because pipe water supply is still a pipe dream in rural India. It's easier for them to actually dig a bore well and get water rather than wait for someone to provide pipe water services. Okay, so this is how the water scenario is looking like, and the implications of such a water scenario, some of it I'm just sharing now, very top highlights, is that you're looking at deaths and disease due to water-related illnesses, lack of hygienic, lack of good quality water, lack of hygienic conditions, etc. And you're looking at 42% of India being fairly drought prone and dry, which is going to have its implications in terms of health. And this is exacerbated with climate change effects. And with a fairly large percent of population now, world's population being in India, we only have about 4% of world's freshwater resources. So these are challenges statistics that really stand out. And this is the basis of our continued endeavor and motivation to work in this space. So moving on, there is this case study of Palakkad. You saw this, you saw the video some time back. And this is really the package that, we try to put together. First is that we look at understanding the issues in a particular Gram Panchayat. So we work in what are called Gram Panchayats. Many of you would know this. So Gram Panchayats are essentially villages or a cluster of villages. Some Gram Panchayats are just one large village. Some Gram Panchayats are a bunch of villages and habitations which are extension of these villages. So we take stock of what's the dynamics through a baseline survey. And in Kerala, we found that, last 4 to 5 years, they've been repeatedly hit by flood and drought alternatively, right? And of all the places, imagine Kerala having a situation like this, which is actually endowed with, forests and a lot of water resources. But, somewhere they let go of their duck well culture and they started depending on pipe water. And the picture on the right actually amply demonstrates this. So we tried to go back and understand why the duck well culture, where was it misplaced, and then whether it could be part of their water security paradigm, and could we bring it back into mainstream, right? So, so one of the things that we did in Kerala was to look at what is the package of solutions apart from pipe water supply that we can provide. So duck well, pipe water supply, both of them seem like things that we could do. The duck well culture essentially addressed the issue of reviving shallow aquifers, while pipe water supply was built on bore wells from deeper aquifers. So we had to look at ensuring that those deeper aquifers also are addressed. So we had to do a lot in terms of what we call source sustainability measures. So even if you put a borewell, we need to ensure that the borewell sustains water over a period of time. So in the Kerala context, if you see, it gave us an opportunity to work on multiple aspects on water security. And from the Kerala example, I want to go to some specific strategies that we have undertaken more recently over the last 5 years, and which has become mainstream to our programs, right? So what are these essentially? What are these, basic lessons that we have learned, and what is it that others can replicate? So the first is things that we found that pipe water is essential, right? But of course, doorstep pipe water supply is essential for people to reach that 55 liters MPCD per day. But what happens when the source itself dries up? What do communities do? What do rural communities do? Right? So they often face shortages. And in lean seasons particularly, the only go-to source that they have is the local well, which has been providing them water from shallow aquifers over the last many decades. Right? So this becomes a lifeline of the community. So, and there is also these, erstwhile hand pumps that have been put up as part of various government measures, local funds, Gram Panchayat funds. And these are all infrastructure that is just lying there, waiting to be reused. So this is something that is our first approach to try and ensure that they become the critical lifeline for the community. And once this initial critical hardware is restored, some bit of their water supply is actually addressed. And then we embark on ensuring the more detailed program of a pipe water supply, where we try and revive the source. Typically, there are only about 1 or 2 sources in a habitation. And there, if you see, these borewells are either private, and somebody has put it, and somebody's provided pipelines, and it goes to some part of the community, and they use stand posts to collect this water. Now, can we ensure that this can be expanded and doorstep supply can be provided? And that's our entire pipe water supply program. This is anywhere between 100 to 150 households. It costs us about 15 lakhs. We provide the source, provide the pipeline, the overhead tank, and then the stand post to ensure that all of this reaches the doorstep. We also do a water quality test, a lot of water quality testing. I will come back to it in the subsequent slides. So now I talked a little bit about our strategy for shallow aquifers, the dug wells and hand pumps, right? Now, what about the bore wells, which is actually taking water from the deeper aquifers? Now, many of us would know that today bore wells are actually going deeper and deeper. People are sucking harder and harder into our ground for water, but nobody is actually thinking of recharging this. There is a lot of rhetoric around this. There is a lot of publicity and campaigns going on around this, but is it effectively being done? This is even more challenging in urban, but relatively easy in rural, I must say. If you actually plan this better at very minimal cost, with minimal technology, with very effective, simple technology, we should be able to achieve this. That is the silver lining that we have, and that is something that I want you all to take away from this. So on the top left, if you see, this is basically what is called an injection well. It is also something which we also called an abandoned bore well. Essentially, several bore wells which were put earlier have dried up and people have stopped using this. So what we simply do is try and channelize water into these abandoned bore wells, provide the necessary perforation so water actually goes in, and if required, we take the borewell shaft inside to ensure that the water is actually directly recharged into the aquifer. And once this is done, we find that even within one hydrological cycle, the community easily has another source for it to harness water from. So this is something that we have done in many of our interventions where we have done pipe water supply to ensure that the source is well protected. Now, the second most common thing is rainwater harvesting. Rainwater is perhaps still the purest form of water that we get, apart from water from deeper aquifers. Of course, with pollution, etc., increasingly it is becoming a challenge. But a large part of this rainwater is not being managed, not being harvested. So if they can be stored and the excess can be recharged through simple storage structures and recharge structures, you will find that will practically compensate for 20-25% of water that we are actually using. In fact, we have noticed that in several of our interventions, rainwater harvesting structures help to recharge in very localized manner, recharge local aquifers for that school to be using its. And we found that suddenly the borewell of the school has actually been revived, and one fine day they're able to actually get water from. Right. So we decided that we will intensify these recharge measures, both at two levels, at shallow aquifers and deeper aquifers. The main strategies being recharge pits, rainwater harvesting structure, etc. for shallow aquifers. For deeper aquifers, we are looking at simple technologies like abundant borewell recharge structures and injection wells. And these all happen anywhere in the range of 25,000 to 50,000 to 75,000 rupees of a unit cost, which is something is not a very large sum today. And this is, in fact, we are trying to scale this down more and more because we know that let's take the example of a mobile phone, for instance. Today, with so many players, including Reliance, all of them entering the market, your smartphone is so cheap. And that's the reason why the penetration of smartphone is so much more. And now if we go into a rural India and we say, we have a fancy technology for 1.5 lakhs and we would like to put this in your community, they will tell us, great, you have some money, please go ahead and put it. We'd like to see how it looks like. Fine, but we have nothing to do with it. You came with your money and you put it up, right? But if we can make it so attractive that 1.5 lakh actually comes down to 15,000, which is a fairly small pot of money which the community can mobilize and actually start to replicate that structure across the habitation, across the Gram Panchayat, you will automatically help them solve their problem. And this is where we are really trying to get to. So our high tech is actually low tech, so to speak, right? And this is something that can also be done with very locally available material, with local masons, plumbers, and simply achievable within a fairly short period of time. So this is really our strategy in terms of how we look at source sustainability, which is our very first step to ensure water security, right? So you talked, one of the questions that you might be having in mind is that, you're talking so much about source sustainability and recharge. How the hell do we know where to do the recharge, right? How do we know what is underneath us? Where do we know where the water is going? You might often, hear this excuse that I am putting a recharge pit in my apartment and it is only going to benefit my neighbor. What is the point of me investing capex of say 50,000 on putting a recharge pit when my neighbor is going to benefit, right? So the point here is that there are aquifers here at play which are either localized or which are large and which can actually help serve a very large geography. But we need to understand this. We need to understand our aquifers. We need to connect our communities with the aquifers, and we need to do our recharge efforts in a way that these aquifers are targeted properly, and we can maximize the impact of the water that we are recharging. So as we were doing a lot of sustainability work, we came across this organization called Aquadam, which helped us figure this out, right? They said there are simpler ways of doing aquifer mapping. Basis your measurements of bore wells and duct wells, you will really be able to understand where your aquifers are. So then you can locate your bore well recharge structure or your injection shaft accordingly and ensure that you have better bang for your buck. And so what I'm showing here is essentially a slide from that initiative, which is in North Karnataka, in Raichur and Gulbarga, where we had done this effort. We are now mainstreamed it in many of our programs. So here we were able to actually target our recharging through this aquifer mapping and managed aquifer recharge approach. And this is something that I would also request many of you working on water to look at. Very simple ways we involve the community, both their anecdotal information and with simple data collection around their bore wells and duct wells, and with simple analysis and interpretation of results, which we take back to the community and let them know that these are where your aquifers are. This is why your pond has perennial water. This is why your farm pond keeps drying up. So therefore, we will be recharging here to ensure that your farm pond has some dead storage for your cattle to take care of, and some fishermen can have their livelihood even in their acute summer months, right? So So this is really the package in terms of water security that I wanted to sort of talk about. So not only do we look at just the interventions that I talked about within the habitation, we also see that there are other opportunities within or just outside the habitation as well. So for example, schools have such a large such large tracts of land, public schools, that there's so much of water that falls here. And if you're able to harness the water from these premises, from the roofs of these schools, from the runoff from the premises, and not let any water out of the premises and recharge them, that actually helps us to get more from the initiative that we undertake for the habitation. So similarly, if you see on the right, it is a simple grey water treatment structure in a school. So the water that comes from hand washing and all of that is also recycled. So in some sense, we are looking at closing the loop, ensuring that not only are we harvesting, but we are also recycling the water that is generated. Post-use water is also recycled, right? And that water is also treated and recharged. And this is what is happening in urban India, but if we can kind of scale this up in rural India, I think we would go a long way in terms of water security. So just in terms of finally, how do we manage all this, right? As through our interventions, there are several people within the community who are really the ones who need to be doing this. It's not WaterAid, it's not any other NGO, it's really the social capital that is within the community, right? So there are youth, there are women, there are several champions who have done this, there are farmers who are willing to do this, there are people who have some skills in terms of plumbing, repairs, etc. How do you galvanize this community? How do you build the social capital with these people and not bring in something that is extraneous and leave it and then exit, right? So our main strategy, therefore, is to ensure that we build this cadre of grassroots technocrats. So they are, of course, specialists in their own way. They know what is best for the habitation. They have a simple set of skills which they can deploy. Can we just refine it? Can we just own this, and can we just give them direction so they can take care of their water quality? They can ensure that water is supplied appropriately. They can ensure that operations and maintenance of these assets are taken care of. We are now also working on a project where we are looking at providing finances for communities to actually do their own in an enterprise model. So operations and maintenance is actually something that could be profitable. This is what we are seeing in some of our interventions in North Karnataka and in Guntur, where this is actually becoming an enterprise and giving livelihood. And instead of just being philanthropy, this is actually moving to livelihood generation. So this is the final formula in order for us to make water security work. And the last slide, which I leave with, is really the template, which is a summary that I want to leave with all of you. So we look at active involvement, community participation, which is very critical for us. We know without that, everything fails. There's a large part of it requires awareness creation, knowledge sharing, and so on. And bulk of this work requires inclusive planning. Like I said, they will always see you as WaterAid. WaterAid is a pot of money and they want to do something, but they will never get involved in it unless we look at involving them more systematically. The fourth step is to look at developing volunteers cadre and then building their capacities, and very importantly, looking at operations and maintenance. Now, this is something that governments and others, private sector, when they do it through contract mode, they are unable to do this. The cost is very high. The community is not interested in taking this on. So once you put up these assets, if you build a robust operation maintenance plan, building the community cadre, you will find that these systems will get sustained. Interventions in institutions that I talk about, because collectively they are part of the rural society. And lastly, all of this is something that if we are able to take to district administration as a package, and then they are convinced that this is a model that's working. So in Chittoor, in Guntur, in places in Andhra, in places in Telangana and Sangareddy, we are actually trying to scale it up across the district, whether it is a water quality surveillance model, or whether it is a water security model, or a groundwater recharge model, without taking this model to the district administration and ensuring that it is scaled up through some sort of technical assistance. We will be continuing to grow from gram panchayat to gram panchayat without ensuring that this doesn't scale at all.